Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Watch World. I'm here today at Glendalough Lake in County Wicklow in Ireland, and we are going to walk up hopefully to the top of these hills up here and talk about the history of the Rolex Submariner. So welcome back to the channel, guys. I hope you are all well. As I said, I'm here in Glendalough in County Wicklow, one of the most beautiful places in Ireland. And yeah, so we're going to talk about the history of the Rolex Submariner. Around 18 months ago, I made a video called The History of the Omega Speedmaster. So I was thinking, why not make it a bit of a series? We can talk about all the history of different kinds of watches, while hopefully traveling around Ireland, which is where I live, and looking at some of the most scenic places the country has to offer. So, as I said, we're here at Glendalough. The weather is not great. It's February in Ireland, so I don't really expect anything else. But it's dry, it's not too cold. There is quite a bit of fog. I don't know if you can see it up here at the top of the trail where I'm hoping to go. So hopefully it won't be too foggy and we can get some nice shots at the top. But unfortunately, it's not going to be guaranteed. The signs aren't looking good, but we're going to try our best anyway. So the Rolex Submariner made its debut in 1953. But Rolex's history with waterproofing watches actually goes back quite a lot further than that. Going back to 1926 was when Rolex released the famed Oyster case, which was waterproof, and they even used to advertise it in shop windows, having the watch sitting in a tank of water. So that was where it all began. It was the first, I believe, ever waterproof wristwatch, and this would eventually lead on to using that technology in the Submariner in 1953. In September of 1953, a specifically designed Rolex dive watch was attached to the outside of Swiss scientist Auguste Piccard's bathyscaphe, diving to a depth of 3,131.8 meters, before returning to the surface in perfect running order without any signs of water ingress. Now, a lot of people think that the Submariner was the world's first purpose-built dive watch, but it was actually just pipped to that feat by the Blancpain 50 Fathoms, which came out earlier in 1953. But the Submariner in the decades gone by has really surpassed the 50 Fathoms in terms of being a more iconic watch. And that's not me trying to knock the Blancpain. I love the 50 Fathoms and think it is a great watch. Now, the wind is starting to pick up a bit, so I've just had to stop and put the foam windshield on the GoPro, so hopefully that'll do its job. But anyway, so the reference 6204 is often referenced as the first iteration of the Submariner, and it actually has a lot of the same design traits that the Submariner still holds today. So you have the circular hour markers, the rectangular indices at 3, 6 and 9, 3 obviously if you have the no date sub. We have the timing bezel and so on. But the one thing that the 6204 had that was different was the straight lined handset. So it didn't have the current Mercedes handset that we know today, that we, so familiar associate with Rolex. That came at a later date. The 6204 also featured a 60-click timing bezel. Now, for those that don't know, the timing bezels were designed for divers when they were down underwater. They could time how much oxygen they had left, so, they would know when that they had to rise up to the surface. Also, the watches were featured with lume on the dial. It was radium back then, but again, it was so they could see in dark conditions. So again, underwater, where it might be a bit darker, they could see perfectly between the timing bezel and the lume. They could tell how much oxygen they had left, so that, they knew when they needed to go back up to the surface of the sea. The original Submariner did have something over the 50 Fathoms though. It had a never-before-seen twin-lock crown system. This had 2 sets of O-rings that formed a pair of watertight seals within the winding stem system. This meant the Submariner was the first watch officially rated to go down to a depth of 100 meters. So all these features meant that the Rolex Submariner had become a very sought after watch. It was tough, it was robust, it was waterproof, and it looked great as well. But Rolex didn't stop just there. Over the next 6 years, there were 8 different reference numbers came out of the Submariner line. Now, all with minor differences, but most of them looked pretty much the same. So I'm just going to stop here for a second because we are at the miners' village in Glendalough, and I was just reading a little bit of information about it back there on the sign. It's really, really interesting. So basically what this place used to be, and you can see here we've got all these old stone buildings, and essentially back in the 1850s there was a mining company here, the Mining Company of Ireland, and they apparently, looking at the sign back there, they used to have all tramways all along here that used to bring lead ore to the village. What this was called dressing floors, where they used to separate the lead that was valuable and useful and the ore and stuff. They used to separate it from the stuff that was waste, which would eventually be thrown away. And apparently by 1890 they were pretty much gone, and this essentially is all that remains of those buildings, and this one here, which we'll go and take a look at. But it's very very interesting how it's all just gone. You know, there's no signs of, if I didn't read it on the sign back there, there's no signs of tramways or anything like that. I mean, look at this. This is all that that remains of those times from, 170 odd years ago or whatever it was. So yeah, we're making our way along anyway. So we're going to head up here. There's a waterfall just up there, and that should take us up to the top then, and hopefully, if it's not too foggy up there, we should have a nice view of the upper and lower lakes of Glendalough. But anyway, back to Rolex. So as I was saying, there was over a 6-year period after 1953, there was 8 different versions of the Submariner were released. Now, I'm not going to go through each 8 individually because that would just take too long, but there are 3 that I have picked out. The first one is the reference 6200. This was the first of the big crown subs, and it also had a thicker case. This was ran from just 1955 to 1956, and yeah, had a thicker case, and it was the first of the Rolex Submariners to feature a 200-meter water resistance rating. So the second one that I'm going to mention is the reference 6538. Now, this is most famously known as the James Bond sub, and it was the reference that James Bond wore in the first of the Bond films, Dr. No, in 1962. And this one I'm going to go into a lot more detail in just a moment after I list the third one. So the third one then is the reference 5508, and this was a small crown version, and it was actually the first of the Submariners to be rated superlative chronometer. So, sit rep, we are here at the waterfall, and down there, all the way down there, is the miners' village that we looked at a little while ago. Great view of the lake over there as well. So we're getting to the top. We still have a bit of a way to go, but slow and steady wins the race, eh? So I've just arrived at the upper half of the miners' valley. So you can see there's a building right there, another one just here, and there's another one down there by that pile of gravel. And just down there, actually, I couldn't get down there, it's too boggy today, but there's an old wheel and cart, and I'm guessing that's where the tramways used to start, and take it all the way down to the miners' valley that we were at earlier. So again, this is what's left of the upper half of the miners' valley, which again I think is really cool, really interesting to see how it was done back in those days. It's a shame the tramways are gone. They would have been very cool to look at. So as you may be able to tell by the background, I'm getting higher up, I'm getting closer to the top, and it's not looking promising to have any nice views from the top today. It is very foggy, but look, we'll plow on and we'll get up there and we'll see what it's like when we're at the top. But again, the signs are still not looking good. So the Rolex Submariner is intrinsically linked to James Bond, and although Bond characters have worn Omegas since Pierce Brosnan became Bond in the 90s, the Rolex Submariner was the first watch seen on the wrist of a James Bond character, originally played by Sean Connery in the first film Dr. No in 1962. The Submariner featured in 8 James Bond movies and showcased the watch as a do-it-all timepiece. Connery is seen wearing it with his dive suit underwater, but also with his dinner suit in a more formal setting. So this was probably the single most greatest piece of advertising in watch history. So the 6538 was worn in the first 4 Bond films, and then in 1969 for the film On Her Majesty's Secret Service it was changed to the reference 5513. And the 5513 was also worn in the films in the 70s, Live and Let Die and The Man with the Golden Gun. Now, when I said there that it was probably the single most greatest piece of advertising history for a wristwatch, maybe second most, maybe the Speedmaster going into space was the greatest piece of advertising. But anyway, the last Rolex Submariner to feature in a Bond film was in the 1987 film The Living Daylights. And this was the reference 16610. And the only difference being with this one was that it was the date version of the Submariner, the first date Submariner ever to be worn in a Bond film. So here we are at the top, and as expected, we cannot see anything. Yeah, it is just fog for miles. Somewhere down there you can just about see the lake where we started, just there. But yeah, we cannot see, more or less, not see a single thing. Now, I'm not too disappointed. You know, I've got out of the house for the day. I've got some exercise in. It's taken about an hour and 45 to 2 hours to get here to the top. And I've shot a video. So all is well in my world. And definitely 100% coming back. Probably in the summertime when it's a bit clearer and you can see the views and stuff, but I've enjoyed this so much that I'm definitely coming back. You know, I've had stops on the way up. I've spoken to people, you know, from all different parts of Europe, people from Spain and Germany and Holland. So, you know, I've had some fun, met some great people, and yeah, we're gonna head back down the trail now, down to the bottom, and continue our discussion about the Rolex Submariner. So in 1959, Rolex released the reference 5512, and this is where the Submariner really began to take its shape and settle down after all the different reference numbers and all the different versions that we had had in the previous 6 years dating back to 1953. So the 5512 was basically an amalgamation of all the best features from the previous 8 versions that we had seen over the years. So this included a 40mm case, the Mercedes handset. It had a completely, whoop, nearly fell over and broke my ankle, a completely redesigned bezel with all the markings, and for the first time it had the addition of crown guards as well. Now, we've had a little bit of a break in the fog, so we can get a better view anyway of, so that's the lake where we started. We came all the way along here, and down there then we have the miners village where we were earlier on. So yeah, we're starting to get more of a view as we descend back down, but hopefully, fingers crossed, before we finish up this video and get back to the bottom, we'll have a few more nice views to take in before we finish up. So since the introduction of the 5512 in 1959, the lineup then remained pretty unchanged until 10 years later in 1969, when we saw the introduction of the 1680. And this was the first model of Submariner to feature a date. So we had a date wheel at 3 o'clock, and we also had the magnifying Cyclops that has become so accustomed to, you know, that we've become so accustomed to seeing with Rolex. And ever since then, Rolex has produced 2 different lines of Submariner. So we have the Rolex Submariner Date, and we have the No Date Submariner as well. And that continues all the way through to the present day. So it's hard to believe now, given how popular the Submariner is in 2025. But when the 1680 came out in 1969, it actually received a lot of criticism. So critics basically thought that there was no purpose for a date being on a dive watch. And I suppose in a way they are right. You know, a diver doesn't need to know what date it is. But critics said, and it's funny because it kind of turned out to be true, their prediction, but they said back in 1969 that it marked the end of the Rolex Submariner as a purpose-built dive watch, and it began its transition into a luxury status symbol, which I suppose is what more people would recognize it as today, as there are more non-divers wearing the Submariner than there are divers. Up until 1975, the Submariner text on the dial was also featured in red writing. This changed in 75 when the white text took over, which we still see on the modern day subs. In 1979, the watch got a major upgrade with the reference 16800. This had an upgraded 3035 movement and also featured sapphire crystal in front of the dial, making it highly scratch resistant. This was also the first Submariner to feature a 300-meter water resistance rating, which is also still seen on the modern Submariners. So, since the beginning of its run in 1969, the 1680 has actually also been made available in a variety of different metals. So, since 1969, it's been available in full yellow gold. Since then, we've also had two-tone versions, platinum versions, and so on. So, I suppose that kind of also suited the narrative that it was becoming a status symbol rather than a purpose-built dive watch. But however, the no-date sub has always been a stainless steel watch with a black dial and black bezel, whereas also with those variety of different materials, the date Submariner has also been available in blue dials, green bezels, blue bezels, and so on. Also, it is made of, since the 1980s, it has been made of 904L stainless steel. 904L stainless steel is a lot more resistant to corrosion than the standard 316L stainless steel that was used before and is used by most watches today. So the 904L stainless steel, much more resistant to corrosion, and is now named oyster steel. So if you ever see Rolex advertising watches made of oyster steel, that's a 904L stainless steel. So in 1979, Rolex released the first Submariner to feature a high beat movement. This was the reference 16803, and the movement inside had a beat rate of 28,800 beats per hour. So not much really happened then in the 90s. This brings us into the 2000s, when I think it was 2003, where Rolex introduced Cerachrome bezels. So Cerachrome is a type of ceramic, and it is fade proof and scratch proof, making the Submariner bezels much more resistant and will keep them looking better for longer. Sometimes, I don't know if you've seen on eBay or Chrono24 pictures of things like that, you may see very old Submariners with faded bezels. So the Cerachrome ones won't fade like the old ones used to. And then in 2008, the Submariner made the upgrade to the Maxi case. So the Maxi case was introduced in 2005 in the GMT Master 2 line, and it came into the Submariner line in 2008. And what that meant was basically the only differences was it was still a 40mm watch, but the lugs were kind of broader, more square looking, and the handset was bigger, as well as the hour markers were bigger also. So this brings us to 2020, when Rolex moved the Submariner up to a 41mm case. And despite this, the watch actually didn't look too much bigger, because on the 41mm version, they've actually made the lugs more slender and moved them down to how they used to look before they broadened them out in the Maxi case. And that's kind of it. That's where we've been since 2020. So not much really has happened since then. We're nearly down at the end of the walk now, back to the car park. So I hope you have enjoyed this video. I hope you've enjoyed this style. I will hopefully try to make more of them. Maybe save the next one until the summertime when the weather is better. But yeah, so we've done space with the Speedmaster. We've now done sea with the Submariner. So what can we do next? Maybe air. I'd love to do a history of the Breitling Navitimer. Breitling is a watch that I haven't really spoken about much on the channel, but the Navitimer is a watch that I do love. Or maybe land, we could do the Rolex Daytona and all the racing history that goes along with that. So yeah, hopefully you'll be seeing more in this series as the months go on. And here we are back at the car park. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I certainly enjoy making these kinds of videos. I learned stuff about the Submariner that I never knew before. So I hope you enjoyed it too. And we'll definitely come back here in the summer when the weather is better and show you how beautiful this place is. So guys, thank you again. Please hit that like button and the subscribe button if you're new here, and I will see you in the next one. Until then, take care for now.